Battle Log V9 recorded ships winning after every crew died. The Admiral's final command, vanishing without trace, starts in the command deck, not in a legend. Admiral Cade is doing a job that should be boring. Then a cracked command helmet makes the first normal sentence impossible. At the command deck, routine still exists. The first job is simple: count the living, count the dead, secure the deck. Admiral Cade keeps a cracked command helmet near the worklight while Battle Log V9 waits under one clipped corner. Cade keeps one hand on one nearby tag because people trust routine longer than they should. Red emergency light strobes across glass and dried oxygen froze scent. The Admiral wants the victory report delayed until the bodies are named. The survivor demands a victory speech because command is listening to the order feed. For a few seconds, the practical answer still has a chance. Someone checks the latch, the clock, or the order board, and that ordinary check comes back wrong. The argument becomes physical. Cade sets the helmet on the cracked command table. The survivor salutes with the wrong hand because the right one will not stop shaking. The first useful change is not a theory. The helmet speaker clicks after every dead name. The bridge survivor closes one record and keeps one hand over the page. Writing it down would make it harder to undo. The commander makes the kind of choice people defend later. Cade marks the dead carrier active to keep the retreat lane open. The bridge survivor pays first. The enemy surrenders to ships with no living crew. The survivor holds one hand against the table. The result is already in the room. The bridge witness tries to make the moment sound procedural. It does not work. A cracked helmet does not move. The room around it changes because victory arrives wearing the shape of a casualty report. The old label stays on one record, and the fleet commander has to carry it anyway. The shaking officer now has to live inside the Risu LT. Nobody gets a speech. They get the helmet speaker clicks after every dead name. The surviving officer tries the ordinary fix fur scent. It is a good instinct and it fails in a visible way. The failed fix leaves Battle Log V9 more dangerous than a helmet. After the argument, Cade checks the casualty count against the suit tags. The count is boring. The missing tag is not. From there, the survivor reaches for the rail, then lets go before anyone can mistake that for confidence. The Admiral sets one casualty sheet on the deck. Red light crosses the names. By contrast, the bridge witness lowers both hands before the count changes again. The shaking officer watches the marker burn through paper. The black box vault looks manageable at first. The vault is colder than the hangar and smells like burned plastic. The black box core stays on the table close to the black box technician, while the last command packet sits beside the nearest hand. The black box technician checks one name under the lamp. The ordinary motion gives everyone one more second. The core glows red under a layer of gray handprints. The technician wants to disconnect the core before it sends another order. Cade refuses because the order might explain who kept firing. No one panics yet. That would make the problem official. The technician removes one firing key and hides it under his tongue. The technician gags on the key when the dead admiral says his name. The room answers with a practical change. A gun deck answers before anyone touches the panel. Cade slides one page flat and keeps two fingers on it. The black box tech chooses the practical lie. Cade plays the packet at full volume. The cost reaches the technician before the report can soften it. The black box core keeps firing orders into wreckage. Under pressure, the technician grips one rail. The result is already where everyone can see it. Cade reaches for the safest label. The black box keeps its place, but the old explanation fails. The chain of command survived death by becoming a machine habit. The old word stays on the page, and the core technician has to walk it forward. The box tech tries to undo the harm by returning to ordinary procedure. The procedure refuses to help. The last command packet records the cost anyway. The sealed core keeps firing orders into wreckage. Past midnight, the technician has a reason to hide the next detail. That is the human part. The choice is not madness, it is pressure. Then a gun deck answers before anyone touches the panel, and the pressure becomes public. Across the margin, the technician asks for a medic and nobody moves quickly enough. That pause matters more than another explanation. Nearer the source, the black box tech carries the field kit over by hand and sets it beside the blood-dark boot print. The core technician pulls one key from a glove seam. Blood touches the metal. Cade steps closer then stops. The panel unlocks before anyone speaks. The first minute inside the evacuation lock is almost dull. The lock should cycle in 90 seconds. The convoy pilot leaves a crushed distress buoy where everyone can see it, and the retreat denial stays visible on the table. The convoy pilot sets one page beside the light and nobody moves it. Amber debris taps the lock door like rain on armor. The pilot wants to pull survivors out before the carrier turns. The sergeant orders him to wait for authorization from a bridge that is already dead. Everyone gives the ordinary explanation one last second. The pilot cuts the tether and burns the thrusters cold. The sergeant calls him a coward. The pilot does not argue because he agrees. After that, the record has a new shape. The distress buoy keeps pulsing after the pod goes dark. The Marine sergeant folds one sheet and traps it under one palm. The convoy lead takes the option that can still be explained to a board. He leaves one rescue pod behind because the pod repeats the dead order. That decision hurts the rescue pod crew first, and the retreat corridor burns before anyone orders retreat. The rescue pod crew sets one cup down without drinking. The result has reached them first. The Marine sergeant tries to shrink the damage into paperwork. Nobody has to decorate the moment. A crushed distress buoy now means this: the fleet is being saved by decisions nobody will forgive. The old name stays under the clip, but the evacuation pilot can no longer trust it. The pod crew keeps moving because stopping would become an answer. After that, the fleet is being saved by decisions nobody will forgive. The evacuation lock gives them one quiet minute. Someone checks a latch, a switch, a seal, or a timestamp. The check should end the argument. Instead, the retreat corridor burns before anyone orders retreat. The mistake is practical. The rescue pilot seals the gun deck panel before the count is finished. The sergeant notices, reaches for the manual release, and leaves their hand there too long. The trapped crew grips the rail with both hands. Amber debris hits the armor outside. Behind that, the pilot cuts one tether and the pod number disappears from the board. The lock sergeant reads the empty slot twice. The armistice table gives them a normal surface to hold onto. The table has water glasses, 3 pens, and 1 pistol nobody mentions. The enemy surrender code rests where nobody can pretend not to see it while the armistice clerk keeps one hand near a torn surrender flag. The armistice clerk counts 3 marks on one tag, then stops trusting the count. Cold engine glow leaks through the cracked conference glass. The clerk wants the surrender accepted before Fleet Command rewrites the battle. The envoy refuses to sign because the ships that beat them have no crews. The quiet does not feel supernatural. It feels administrative. The clerk pins the torn flag under the pistol barrel. The envoy cries when he realizes his empire surrendered to corpses. The proof stops being decorative when the flag lifts by itself when the guns outside rotate. The surrender envoy presses one hand over the line nobody wants read aloud. The armistice witness picks the answer that protects procedure first. The clerk signs for Cade without permission. The result is immediate for the surrender envoy. The armistice table inherits a battle nobody alive controlled. The envoy puts one palm on the glass. The result is already behind it. The enemy envoy says the official sentence first. The evidence is plain enough to hurt. Peace becomes another document written by the dead. The category sits on the paper while the treaty clerk carries the cost past it. When they leave the armistice table, the route forward is narrower. The enemy surrender code is still visible. A torn surrender flag is still close. And the surrender witness has paid first. The delegate understands the cost before the senior people do. Nobody calls it revelation. They are too busy deciding who has to touch a torn flag next. Nobody has a speech ready. Quietly, the envoy wipes frost from one sleeve and keeps looking at the deck. The ceasefire clerk lowers their voice because quiet is easier to survive than certainty. The clerk pushes one glass of water across the table. The enemy envoy does not drink. The pistol slides when the carrier shudders. The surrender witness signs with a hand that will not stay still. Nothing in the weapons chapel announces itself as history. The chapel is only a nickname, but everyone lowers their voice there. A sealed weapon key remains the only thing nobody wants to move while the forbidden payload manifest lies flat in the working light. The weapons officer steadies one hand on the desk. Routine holds for another breath. White warning paint flakes from the payload cradle. The weapons officer wants to prove the forbidden weapon fired after the bridge died. Fleet Command orders her to bury the manifest and call the blast heroic. The sensible answer is still alive barely. She breaks the key in a vise and keeps both halves. She apologizes to the dead before she sends it to the living. What matters is the change left behind. The manifest prints one more firing time after the printer is unplugged. Command moves one chair back and keeps the page in reach. The officer does not mean to hurt anyone. She sends the manifest to Cade over unsecured command audio. By the time anyone argues motive, the gun officer is already carrying the cost. The victory report loses every survivor before it lists the dead. The weapons chief watches one light change. The result no longer needs permission. The war desk tries to keep the problem inside the form. A sealed weapon key becomes harder to touch after that because the fleet did not win the battle. It was spent after it stopped being able to consent. The old label stays under the weapons officer's hand until the hand moves %. The detail is small enough to miss until someone tries to leave. Then the manifest prints one more firing time after the printer is unplugged. The forbidden payload manifest changes the room's behavior, not just the theory. The payload officer moves from the doorway to the table, and the command board moves back. That small movement tells the truth before anyone says it. For a while the work becomes ugly and small. Someone labels a body tag. Someone checks a pressure gauge. The officer presses a thumb against cracked command glass until the skin goes pale. The gun officer carries the broken key to the payload cradle. White paint flakes under her sleeve. The sealed command deck orders silence. The weapons chief drops the manifest on the deck instead. The final convoy lane starts with work, not revelation. The convoy lane is empty enough to look peaceful. The commander works around a burned targeting slate because the final silence report remains close enough to read. The fleet commander keeps one thumb on the form until the paper bends. Cold engine light fades across a lane full of unspent missiles. Cade wants to end the war by refusing the next order. Command threatens to brand him traitor if he does not advance. Nobody wants to be first to name the wrongness. Cade puts the slate on the floor and steps on it until the glass gives. No one cheers. One gunner says thank you and then starts crying. The event becomes usable evidence when the command log seals itself and marks the next battle already low sent. The war desk pins one corner down until the paper stops shaking. The admiral makes one useful mistake. He opens the casualty ledger over command audio instead of reading the victory order. What follows is not symbolic for the next convoy. The next fleet loses the right to call this war finished. The next convoy keeps both feet still. The result moves anyway. The command board wants the report to sound calmer than the room. The category breaks quietly around a burned targeting slate. The last command is not attack or retreat, it is confession. The old word remains on the form, and the commander has to sign around it. A decision is not bigger, it is meaner. The fleet commander can protect the report or protect the following convoy, and the room has already made both choices expensive. The next evacuation line reaches for a burned slate as if it is only evidence. It is heavier than the story anyone wants to tell. By the time the command log seals itself and marks the next battle already lost, the old version of events is no longer usable. The sealed command deck tries to leave with the first acceptable report. Cade steps into the gangway not dramatically, just enough to make the lie wait with them. The admiral steps onto the targeting slate until glass cracks under one boot. Command reaches for the order board. The later rescue wing blocks it with both hands. The lane lights go red behind them. The surviving officer asks for one more check because fear sounds better in procedural language. The commander allows it. The result is worse because victory arrives wearing the shape of a casualty report. The fleet commander sets one casualty sheet on the deck. The The survivor lowers both hands before the count changes again. The bridge witness watches the marker burn through paper. A junior gunner drops a pen and apologizes as if that is the problem. The shaking officer kneels to pick it up, then stays there because standing would make the next order real. Another object will not change anyone. Consequence will. The command corps keeps ordering guns into the wreckage. The technician reacts first, and that reaction changes what everyone else is allowed to deny. The box tech pulls one key from a glove seam. The convoy lead holds the table edge while the Marine reads the line again. Nobody is enlightened by it. They just understand who has to stay in the evacuation bay when the door closes. The evacuation crew grips the rail with both hands. The evacuation pilot cuts one tether and the pod number disappears from the board. The sergeant reads the empty slot twice. After the argument, the rescue pilot checks the casualty count against the suit tags. The lock sergeant reaches for the rail, then lets go before anyone can mistake that for confidence. The delegate steps away from a surrender flag and still cannot leave it behind. The armistice witness places the enemy code under the lamp, and the ordinary room stops feeling available. The treaty clerk pushes one glass of water across the table. The envoy does not drink. The enemy envoy signs with a hand that will not stay still. The war desk pulls the nearest chair back without sitting down. That tiny retreat matters. It gives the payload officer enough space to make the wrong useful choice. The officer carries the broken key to the payload cradle. The command board orders silence. The gun officer drops the manifest on the deck instead. The weapons chief seals the gun deck panel before the count is finished. The sealed command deck notices, reaches for the manual release, and leaves their hand there too long. Cade opens the folder, closes it, and opens it again. The second look is worse because the war log locks itself and names the following battle already condemned. The following convoy blocks it with both hands. The final image is simple. The commander remains in the final convoy lane with a targeting slate close enough to touch. The battle was won after command, crew, and retreat were already gone. The loss record closes itself around the next evacuation line already marked dead. Then the command log sealed itself and marked the next battle as